the cloud. There we are. Okay. So hopefully that is recording at this point. And second, Bautista has a handout, which I will be putting in the chat for
Yes.
everyone. So that will hopefully be there in another minute or two once I find it. But Bautista, you can feel free to get
Oh,
going.
thank you so much. Yeah, I have a handout, and I will be sharing a PowerPoint. I don't know if I can do it right now.
Oh, I will probably have to. Oh, whoopsie, hang
Yeah.
on. Let me first share this handout.
Yeah, well,
Hang on. Everyone. And then, yeah, let's just check that
yeah.
everyone receives this so we don't interrupt you. Have people received the handout successfully in the chat?
I think that you should be able to see my PowerPoint right now. Please let me know.
Okay, I can see it fine. And
PowerPoint
we'll
Okay.
looks good.
and we'll assume that
Okay.
this handout, I can see it in the chat, and Bob's replied. Okay, so off you go. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Emily, for inviting me to present my work today and to share this space also with Melina Tamiolaki. It's a true honor for me. Well, basically, this work is the immediate result of a grad seminar I took a couple of semesters ago with Kinch Hoekstra and John Ferrari. But also, I would say that the seeds of this work were planted long before, while working in the University of Buenos Aires with Claudia Márcico, Rodrigo Iliarraga, and Emiliano Buis. But well, as the title of my presentation suggests, my aim today will be to pursue a comparative analysis of Plato's laws and Xenophon's ways and means, putting the focus on a specific issue, their respective policies towards metics. What sparked my interest was the following problem: how it comes that both authors, sharing the same Socratic intellectual background, arrived to so radically different proposals. The short answer is evident from the outset. While both frame metic migration from an economic perspective, since they chase different economic aims, they necessarily arrive to different policies. But stopping here would be, I would say, insufficient, and of course, it would be a valuable compass for re-evaluating the problem of otherness within the different models of cities proposed by the Socratics, but we would be left wondering why their understanding of economy is ultimately conflicted. And here my claim goes a little bit more riskier and more speculative, and it's something that I want to talk with you. That is, well, Plato and Xenophon do not simply lay out two contradictory rationales about how to better achieve the well-being of the citizens within the polis, but more broadly, they represent two different attitudes when confronting the inherent instability of the world, two different ways of dealing with the dynamics of surplus and scarcity, equilibrium and flux, change and stability in the cosmos we live in. Thus, the picture I propose is not one in which two Socratics are disagreeing merely about metic migration, but maybe also about key concepts that structure their economy and ultimately certain philosophical foundations. But just two disclaimers before I start my presentation. First, those who were present in the Socratica 6 conference in the University of Crete will be able to appreciate that this work is the continuation of the work I presented there. But however, in case you were absent, the first 5 minutes I will try to summarize my claims made there in Crete. Second, for those who were able to listen to my talk in the annual meeting in the Society for Classical Studies this January at San Francisco, you will realize that this presentation goes mostly in the same lines. Well, that said, let us start with Book 4 of the Laws and provide a synthesis of the relationship between the geographical location of Magnesia and its economy, which you can review from passages 1 and 4 in the handout. When evaluating the different alternatives proposed by the speakers in terms of the city's distance from the sea and the productivity of the land, productivity understood in quantitative and qualitative terms expressed by the adjectives poluphoros and pamphoros, they agree to place Magnesia in the middle ground, relatively close to the sea, but surrounded by a hilly and not so fertile soil. Um, this would be quadrant B2 on the table you see on screen. In this way, the loss proves to be neither an ode to scarcity nor an attempt to build an ever-expanding economy. What defines Magnesia's economy is the pursuit of a constant and carefully maintained, though no entirely spontaneous equilibrium. The real threat lies in designing an outward-looking economy, let's say, structured around foreign trade, whether that trade arises from the need to remedy a deficit or conversely from the desire to accumulate precious metals. What I find remarkable is that while arriving to opposite conclusions, this way of reasoning that associates geographical location, foreign trade policies, and more fundamental conceptions of stability and growth, with its own style and pursuing different objectives, are also present in Xenophon ways and means, based on a somewhat hyperbolic and romanticized description of the productive capacity of Attica, which you can see in passages 5, 6, and 7 of your handout. If we were to place Athens as described in ways and means within the diagram, the chart from the laws, it would oscillate between B1 and B3, close enough to the sea, yet at that precise time facing a shortage of resources. Xenophon's aim will be to reverse this condition and take it to B3 by exploiting Attica's natural assets and enacting institutional reforms to create new sources of income, among which attracting metics will be one of the central ones. But the main structural difference with the law seems to be that by lifting restrictions on Athenian trade and declining to regulate its potential consequences, Xenophon is paving the way, and now we maybe begin to glimpse his broader philosophical framework for a more radical idea that both imports and exports, and indeed the entire economy, Athenian economy, can enter a process of potentially unbounded expansion. And here, what is striking is not merely that this dynamic of perpetual growth is presented as desirable, but that once these policies are in place, there appears to be no internal economic force capable of limiting it. Of course, I'm not arguing that there are no external limitations, especially geopolitical ones, if we keep in mind that the aim of Xenophon was of reducing the hostility of other Greek cities toward Athens. But at times, Xenophon seems to operate within a framework where the very notion of scarcity has no real place in this, let's say, economic cosmos of Athens. And this can be seen specifically in his account of the production of the mines of silver, which I briefly include in passage 8 of the handout. But now, yes, with this economic framework having been laid down, let us proceed with their different policies regarding metics. And this topic is expressly addressed in the end of Book 8 of the Laws, which you have in passage 9 of the handout, where the Athenian stranger presents us a sui generis normative regulation. And I read, "He who wishes may obtain the right of residence on the stated conditions, since there is a dwelling of foreigners for he who wishes and is able to settle in, if he possesses a skill and stays no more than 20 years from when he is inscribed. Neither he will pay the residence tax, nor even small, except that of moderation, nor indeed other tax regarding buying and selling. But when the time expires, carrying his wealth, he shall depart. However, if during those years he turns out to become worth of esteem for himself by some sufficient good service to the city, and if he trusts to persuade the council and the assembly, because he considers to have a right to an official postponement of the departure, or straightforwardly perpetually for life, let him come forward and persuade the city, and whatever he may persuade, let this be valid for him." The first thing that calls the attention of the reader when approaching this passage is the open arms attitude towards the reception of metics, since having devised in Book 4 such a meticulous criteria when selecting the initial contingent of migrants that would then become the first body of citizens, this sudden flexibility towards subsequent foreigners seems at least puzzling. A policy closer to the famous Spartans in Alesia would have been expected. In fact, the two participles of boulomai enhance this impression, seeming to award the foreigner most of the agency in this process of moving towards Magnesia. The ton boulomenon makes the reader wonder whether a non-Doric candidate or even a non-Greek would equally fit that category. Um, Therefore, aren't we introducing a dose of heterogeneity which was not initially tolerable, or therefore risking producing the very same problems we were aiming to avoid when restricting the initial migration and the granting of citizenship to Cretans and Peloponnesians? How to explain this apparent shift of criteria? Well, a simple way of harmonizing this is by suggesting that the problems attached to heterogeneity only arise when it penetrates the group of people actually exercising political offices and partaking in the civic life of the city. So far and so long you are not a full citizen, the mere cultural different background will not by itself have such a corruptive power upon the unity of Magnesia. Secondly, the Athenian stranger quickly undermines this apparent agency given to the foreigner desiring to move. When the dative participle to boulomeno is accompanied by other participle dunameno. Wishing to move is, of course, not sufficient, and that capacity or ability to move is not self-assessed by the foreigner. It is Magnesia who will evaluate it. In fact, in our translation, this is further emphasized by awarding a conditional meaning to the syntactical structure dependent on the participles kektemenoi and epidemunti. The foreigner must be able to perform an activity that is useful for the city, and if not, there is no place for him. Thirdly, and here the most important counterweight to the permeable attitude towards foreign residents, there is a strict time restriction to this grant of residency, which is not only tamed by the eventual capricious decision of the city, which is only tamed, sorry, by an eventual capricious decision of the city. Remarkable is the imprecision of the actions that would be considered sufficient to attempt persuading the decision-making bodies of Magnesia, even for just a small extension. With no examples provided, there is no parameter, and the police could always hypothetically deny that request. But the way this eventual departure is explained confirms that ultimately the biggest risk does not rest in the metic itself and his very own otherness. The danger lies in the objects that they will manipulate. Recalling the drawbacks that arose from having located Magnesia relatively close to the sea and from its exposures to trade, the way they will further offset the externalities produced by awarding the handling of the commerce to the metics, as can be seen in passage 10 of your handout. Sorry. The way they will further offset the externalities produced is by awarding the handling of the commerce to the metics, this can be seen in passage 10 of your handout. Resident foreigners shall be like the personnel specifically hired in a laboratory to manipulate hazardous elements. This makes us realize that the limit of the 20 years is not structured upon a rejection of metics qua metics, but this is a way of getting rid of the profit they might have made in the natural unfolding of the activity. The key is that the metics depart ten hautu labonta usian, carrying his wealth. And to the question of why it wouldn't be enough to force the metics to discard their property after those 20 years having been reached, while allowing them to stay, a fair answer would be that then there would be no initial incentive to move into Magnesia in the first place. Magnesia is for the metics a commercial enclave, a tax-free paradise where they can make a moderate profit and return from where they had come in a better situation than before. This legal framework, regulating the arrival, life, and departure of residents, foreigners, has many contrasting points from that suggested by Xenophon for Athenian metics. But surprisingly, as we have already mentioned, it seems to share a fundamental trait. If we take a picture from a considerable distance, both approaches regarding metics present a common characteristic. The cornerstone of their migration policies lies in the role that these migrants will play in the overall economic scheme of Magnesia and Athens, respectively. As we can see in passage 11 of your handout, Xenophon will present foreigners, both residents and non-residents, as the key to increase the revenues of Athens. In the case of metics, this is achieved by a mechanism that is explicitly rejected by the Athenian stranger, taxation. The economical lens is applied by Xenophon to define this group is explicit from the outset, since before highlighting any other characteristic, they are defined as a source of income of greatest value, he prosodos ton kaliston. Conversely, in Magnesia, the Athenian stranger, despite also pursuing an economic evaluation, will stand in the opposite street. Not only he will eliminate the metoikion, but also any other types of taxation on foreigners, such as that paid when exchanging goods in the agora. Therefore, it makes sense why Xenophon, while calling for the elimination of the burdens that currently were affecting the metics, it's emphatic in leaving aside taxes from that benevolent reform, as we can see in passage 12. And I read, it seems to me that this care is sufficient if we would take away everything that, without benefiting the city, seems to impose upon them limitations to their rights, and we would take away indeed the obligation that the metics serve as hoplites among citizens. For great is the personal danger, as great is the danger to be away from their works and their homes. The qualification of meden ofelunta ten polin without benefiting the city is precisely suggesting that those burdens, which indeed increase the revenues of Athens, shall be maintained. This lack of financial incentive would have made anyone wonder about the ultimate success of his luring policy, but also it will help us clarify why Xenophon has to include so many other non-economic oriented benefits for them. Furthermore, they are dispensed from the obligation to join the infantry and allowed to form part of the honorable knighted division. They are awarded the right to acquire landed property, and a new magistracy is created, the guardian of metics. In Magnesia, conversely, the economic incentives should suffice, and therefore we understand why there is no need of awarding further honors. On the contrary, it is them who need to stand out and show to the city how much they have given, provided they want to receive further benefits. But the tax paradise of Magnesia is not an option for Athens, let alone the idea of forcing the metics to depart, carrying the very same profit they have made. This would expressly undermine the overarching Xenophontic aim of securing surplus, as it is stated once more in passage 13. And I read, these two would make the metics more well disposed, and as it is probable, all the stateless persons would seek the Athenian metic status and would increase the income. The entire section dedicated to the metic reforms, like a ring composition, starts and ends emphasizing the same point. The foreign residents are a prosodos, and therefore the whole legal framework should be built over that foundational stone. Finally, there is one last topic that needs to be assessed about the proposed metic policy for Magnesia and Athens. The fact that both are focusing this type of migration from an economic perspective explains why the type of metic that are to be accepted does not occupy such a central place as like when the Athenian stranger was discussing the first contingent that would form the body of citizens. However, does this mean that the qualitative concern is totally absent? In Magnesia, the qualitative aspect of metics, detached from the economic function, makes its subtle appearance in passage 9 when, with a dose of irony and upon rejecting the imposition of taxes, the Athenian requires resident foreigners to pay the tax of moderation, to sophronein. In other words, unrestrained and conflictive inhabitants shall not be accepted nor tolerated. Xenophon will be slightly more explicit about their quality, maybe because, unlike Magnesia, he reforms for Athens maintained the tradition of awarding the metics a perpetual right of residence, and therefore their expulsion of the city was not something that befell automatically. First, the fact that stateless people, Hoiapolides, are a specific group of migrants targeted by Athens may allow us to think that we're in front of whole cities that have been destroyed by an attack of a foreign power, but not to people leaving the polis because of stasis, which could have introduced conflict within Athens. Second, when presenting the housing policy for foreigners in passage 14, the mere request of a plot of land does not seem enough. They should also seem to be worthy. And in that way, more and better metics would desire to settle in Athens. However, it is difficult to draw a conclusion out of these two qualitative evaluations of metics in Xenophon. It seems to me that there is not an explicit concern over the eventual cultural or ethnic background of the immigrant. If a specific trait of or type is to be preferred, that would be high-income metics, either capable to acquire horses for the United Division or to build their own house, merely because there would be merely because that would be more aligned with the ultimate aim of incrementing Athens' revenues. So let us wrap up what has been said and draw some conclusions. Both Plato and Xenophon, the two major Socratics, propose radically opposing policies regarding metics, to the extent that some could argue that one was written as a reaction to the other, but leaving aside any claim about authorial intentionality. A take from this comparative work is also methodological. Sometimes it is by putting focus on the intellectual tensions rather than in the points of agreement that we can nail core elements of Socratic philosophy. Elements that, of course, the different members of the Socratic circle were trying to reinterpret and re-elaborate. And in this precise case, the opposition about migration ends up evidencing a common Socratic framework. When thinking about metics, the Socratics didn't tend to frame this as an issue of otherness, but mainly as an economic one. Of course, the complexity lies in the fact that Plato and Xenophon's understanding of economy is also in tension, and this ultimately might be connected with a deeper philosophical, if not ontological, commitments faced with a perpetually shifting sensible world. There seems to be for Plato an urgent need to impose stability, to dampen fluctuation, and to secure equilibrium among the different forces at work. When this attitude is projected into the economic domain, it inevitably collides with any policy that grants free rein to imports, unleashes the city's exports capacities, or embraces the self-perpetuating logic of economic growth. Ultimately, it will end up conditioning the policies regarding metics and will explain why, for example, they are required to live with the profit they have made out of trade. Conversely, if Xenophon has an opposing view towards the reception of metics, it is because of the philosophical foundations of his understanding of economy. For him, there seems to be no need to cast there's no need to cast equilibrium to this world in constant flux. The whole point is to thrive on its instability and to channel these forces towards constant growth. In that sense, the more metics that decide to settle in Athens and increase its revenues, the better. Uh, Thank you so much for your time and for listening to me.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk.
No.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. I'll open the floor to questions and responses. And maybe while everyone's thinking, I'll comment briefly on what you said about scarcity, having little space in Xenophon. That strikes me as entirely the case, and I wonder whether it's not connected to his view of the beneficent gods who have created his Socrates view, and I think Xenophon buys into it as well, who have created this universe for us. And the passage of ways and means that always just kind of makes me laugh is where he tells us that Athens, this is stony, dry, dry Athens, that Athens has sort of abundant fertility, and there is land that yields no fruit if sown, and yet when quarried, feeds many times the number it could support if it grew corn. So this idea that you're looking at this totally poverty-stricken, dry landscape, but when Xenophon looks at it, he sees, he doesn't worry about that. He still sees the abundance of fertility in the form of, the silver in the soil. So it's definitely an abundance mindset. But let's see what Luke has to say.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Juan. Really enjoyed that. I wondered whether we could zoom out a little bit more and think about the use of metics in economic terms. I mean, how Socratic is that? Because you mentioned sort of Socratic background, but when I, for example, think about what I know, which is not much, from the orators and all that, when there's talk about metics, is it always about their economic usefulness, or are there other ways, other reasons to admit metoikoi into your midst, political reasons or that sort of thing? So I wondered, so this is my way of asking you, how Socratic is an
Mhm.
economic view of metics, or is it general?
I see. Oh, well, thank you for both questions and comments. Regarding the first one, Emily, yes, I mean, there are some moments. First of all, of course, this work is, I'm talking about Xenophon's approach to economy, and I'm pretty aware that I haven't talked about the economics, and how like, Xenophon talks or deals with topics of, let's say, growth within the oikos, that it's something that eventually could be included here. But, since we are specifically talking about Athens, yes, two things that struck me, that strike me considerably were this, kind of uh, abundance mindset, or let's say exceedingly optimistic mindset of Xenophon when describing nature and the position of Athens, and and maybe of course this might be connected with the genre and what is the ultimate aim of this, the political objectives that are underlying this text. But specifically, I think that this, when I was thinking about this lack of scarcity, or how scarcity doesn't play such a role in Athens, of course, I was thinking in my mind, and this is something that I developed more in my talk in Crete, was his understanding of the production of the silver mines of Athens, and that in section 4. And specifically, I put a lot of attention there on the center temporal adverbs that he uses. He's constantly casting this, this productive capacity kind of to infinity. That always is going to happen, and it's that temporal aspect that very, with some details Xenophon includes when talking about the production of silver, but also how he ends up finishing them ways and means, again, this idea of the, well, like kind of Athens will enter this process of economical expansion, kind of for perpetuity. That there are certain temporal aspects that for me are very interesting to connect. And yes, linking this with the more divine, let's say, field, it's kind of what I would eventually like to do. Try to see these connections between how these ideas of economy are, can only be built on top of certain, say, theological, ontological commitments that are there underlying. And well, regarding Luke's question, well, that's another avenue that I'm planning slowly to investigate, because of course I'm not a historian of economical thought, and that is, and actually the the relationship between understanding actually how metrics impacted economy in the different Greek polis, and also how this shows up in other genres. It's something that I still in the process of understanding, to see, of course, how radical or not is all this that we are reading, because maybe, as you say, I'm putting the tag of Socratic, and it's kind of the rule. But well, I would assume that also like metics play, and at least in Athens, my understanding is that they also, uh, yeah. I don't want to risk anything, but I agree with your concern at what point we should expand this, and that is something that I will plan to do, and yeah, to test how much of a, yeah, Socratic thing, philosophical way of approaching migration, or even broader.
Yeah, and
Um,
perhaps also Xenophon's. I mean, Luke, you've written on Xenophon's, like the way his language is very accepting of sort of heterogeneity. And arguably through his work, there's a principle of valuing different stripes of
Mhm.
people and their potential contributions, sort of heterogeneous heterogeneity in other
well,
ways too.
Yeah, maybe just a last comment. I remember, like, at the beginning of I'm blanking the Spartan constitution, there is a, not about metrics, but yes, the relevance of population in general when talking about the economical, let's say, productivity or situation of a policy. It's always present in Xenophon. Even, I would say, um, even without specifically talking about metrics, maybe at the same time I'm thinking maybe it's not an issue of how Xenophon or the Socratics are thinking about metrics in relationship with economy, but in terms of population in general and economy. It's even more, so it's also not so striking even within the Socratic. But yeah, I have to think that. Sorry, thank you so
Yeah,
much
well,
for.
it's a wonderful, rich topic. Mariana, you've had your hand up there.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Juan, thank you very much for your talk. The talk about the metics is, of course, very much connected to the historical uh, situation, because, I mean,
Mhm.
both of them, Xenophon and Plato, are writing in classical Athens. They live there. They're a product of classical Athens. It's not happening in space. So we should take a good look at the real situation in the city at that time. This is classical Athens. It is not Hellenistic Athens or Roman Athens, of course. So it's very different than the other period. So I wanted to ask you, have you paid any attention to the metics in classical Athens? Who were they? Were they really the other, as you said several times? And what do you mean by saying the other? And I think you even implied in a way that they were ethnically different from the Hellenes, from the Greeks, which cannot be true as far as I know. So you should be very careful about this, because as far as I know, I mean, I am a historian, but I haven't actually busied myself with this part of Greek history, I mean, Athenian history of classical times. But as far as I know, I would be very, very much surprised to find any non-Greek metrikoi. But you should check that. I think it's a historical question too. So what do you mean by saying the others? The other. So a metric says the other.
Thank you so much for giving me this possibility of expanding on this, because I actually, what I said is that for the Socratics, that's my guess, that's my interpretation. It's not an issue of otherness. I was actually trying to say, what I stated is like, otherness, or the problems with otherness, is not what seems to be at least the core of their discussion. So I was not trying to emphasize so much, or I was, first of all, it's what I'm doing is like comparing the positions of two philosophers, right? I wasn't making claims, his broader historical claims about which is the thing that we were discussing previously before. But going back to the issue of others, I was actually, I think I'm in your lines that I'm saying, oh, they are not framing this as an issue of otherness. That maybe yes, at least in Plato's laws, there seems to be more concern over that, let's say, of from where the migration comes and the cultural, let's say, background when it comes to defining who are going to be the citizens. That's another. This is a section, a small section of a broader work that I've been doing, but and I guess that's an interesting thing to, for example, in Plato, just to compare with how much detail he tries to, to pinpoint, or like, and to, let's say, prefer Doric, migration to constitute that first group of citizens that are going to be the ones populating Magnesia, rather than what happens when he talks about metics. Uh, so I think that I'm in your lines of. I mean, actually, I don't think that I was suggesting the opposite of what you're saying, but I agree with you that I will, of course, like a further step is to bring more, let's say, historical sources and try to fit this into as you say, what was actually happening in Athens. I didn't want to open that discussion in this work precisely.
Well, thank
Thank you
you
so much.
so much. I think at this point, we're through our 10 minutes of discussion. What we'll do, we'll turn to the next paper and discussion, and then we'll have time after that to come back to any further questions also for Bautista. So thank you very much again for your paper and for this wonderful discussion. And there's something in the chat from Paul Dumont with a helpful reference. So thank you for that. So at this point, let's turn to our other speaker, Melina Tamiolaki, Professor of Greek Literature at the University of Crete. She also has some major administrative positions at the university, and I ought to have noted those down as well, Melina. She'll be talking to us about Xenophon's ways and means across genres.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Emily and Sven, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be among friends. Actually, truth to tell, I have missed our Xenophon meetings in situ, but the next one will be far away in Latin America, so I think I will miss that. Well, I will share my screen. Just a moment.
Do I need to allow you to do that somehow?
Can you see now my screen?
Great. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So this paper actually is intended for the volume. I have been co-editing with Emily Baraguanath on Xenophon and genre. And it's a work in progress. I would be very much willing to receive your feedback on this work. Some introductory material. As we know, the Ways and Means belongs to the so-called minor works of Xenophon. According to internal marks, it has been dated in the mid 350s BCE, immediately after the social war, when Athens' imperial revenues had collapsed and the structural rethinking of finance was underway. Xenophon writes as a citizen intellectual, proposing concrete measures to expand the community of metics, to regularize and incentivize commerce, to intensify the exploitation of the Laurian mines, and to consider state entrepreneurship in shipping and leasing labor. Now, the research strands for the study of poroi, very briefly, concern how it is situated in the economic history of ancient Greece. The most recent commentary by Whitehead is historical, as was also the commentary by Gautier. Again, historical question is whether Xenophon's suggestions had or were intended for a practical implementation, and there is this famous article by Cockwell, which is rather outdated, in my opinion, nowadays, because nobody actually believes that there was an immediate practical implementation of these suggestions. A very interesting, in my opinion, approach is the examination of the philosophical background of this work and the examination also of the affinities with Xenophon's political thought, as is the work by Shorn and Sutrupu. And of course, the poroi have been examined in association with the Athenian imperialism. And there is actually a debate whether actually the poroi advocate tranquility, hesychia, or they just propose a new method of retaining the hegemony. As I was reviewing the literature, I think I realized that there is no literary or narrative commentary of the work, and actually the literary features have not attracted much scholarly attention. So concerning genre, Gautier does not discuss genre at all. The most detailed discussion is by Janssen, 2007 dissertation, which offers a detailed analysis of rhetorical features in the pori based on the term συμβουλεύει and on other evidence of the text which alludes to rhetorical procedures. He suggests that the pori is best categorized as a deliberative discourse, συμβουλευτικός λόγος, of the private or proleptic variety, and he concludes that it can be considered a pamphlet in the sense that it is not intended for mass circulation, but rather for the Athenian council. Whitehead, in his recent commentary, characterizes the pori as a sandwich due to its structure. Chapters 1, the first and the final chapters are like an outer wrapping for the main suggestions, which are contained in chapters 2 to 4, and considers the work to be sui generis. Building on Janssen 2007, he emphasizes the influence of rhetoric and agrees with the characterization of the work as a pamphlet. In my opinion, the characterization as a pamphlet has some problems because it sounds rather anachronistic, and there is no conclusive evidence in the work that it is addressed to a small community like the council, as Janssen argues. And more importantly, it does not do justice to the several affinities with genres that Xenophon has successfully cultivated. Some general observations about genre which guide my approach are these here. So Xenophon was experimenting with various genres. All his works resist strict classification of genre because, as we know, his historical works contain philosophical reflections, his philosophical works engage with history, he can combine several genres like biography, historiography, memoir, etc. I agree with Roberto Nicolai, who says in his article that Xenophon used generic strategies appropriate to pre-existing literary genres that he adapted to his own aims, and historical material is as present in his corpus as is philosophical speculation. He further concludes that Xenophon deliberately practiced a kind of Coitzung der Gattungen. I think this is also our main approach in the volume which are co-editing with Emily. So if we admit this premise, it means that in a sense, several, if not all, Xenophontic works can be viewed as sui generis. For example, I think that the Hiero is also sui generis, the Economicus sui generis from several perspectives. And it seems more productive to attempt to trace in Xenophon's works elements of various genres or generic strategies, rather than trying to relate his work solely with one genre. That said, the prevalence of one or more generic strategies in his works cannot be contested. So, I will try to give just some elements. I have more notes, but I have selected some examples about the mixture of genres in the poroi, so about rhetoric, philosophy, and historiography. Of course, being aware that several features may be common among different genres. And my aim is to bring to light the mixture of genres in the poroi and to show its manifold effects on his audience. And I take it for granted that the immediate audience of the poroi is the Athenian citizens. So, concerning rhetoric, of course, there are a lot of rhetorical figures in this work. I was struck by a contrast that I observed in this work. On the one hand, we have some rhetorical features that I have noted here, such as rhetorical questions, superlatives, the rhetorical scheme of anaphora, hypophora, which aim to make the argumentation more powerful and vivid. And on the other hand, we have a plethora of hypothetical clauses. If we notice paragraph by paragraph, there are hypothetical clauses in each paragraph, one or two. So I think that this shows that there is a kind of reservation or uncertainty about whether the proposals will be accepted. And this is not exactly what we would expect from a pamphlet. For example, if the Old Olga can be considered more with greater certainty as a pamphlet, it could be compared antithetically with the ways and means, because its polemic is more assertive, I think. And of course, there are some topics which are common and that we find in Isocrates, like Athenian hegemony, peace, tranquility, practical advice to fellow citizens, and deliberation. Concerning philosophy and political thoughts, it has already been analyzed in scholarship that the Poroi set some Socratic topics, such as the best politeia. There are affinities between the proem of the Poroi and the proem of the Seropedia, the focus on prosperity, the emphasis on use, the intersection of public and private sphere, and the idea that benevolence and friendship is a strategy to secure a stable hegemony. And of course, there is this vocabulary, this philosophical vocabulary of reflection in this work. And I have selected one passage for one, which is typically Socratic. Actually, here Xenophon talks about the dynamis of the minds. So, but of course, this phrase evokes Socrates' maxim to know one's dynamis. And of course, again, we have this Socratic idea that I'm going to teach those who do not know. As scholars have already observed, Xenophon resembles Socrates or Simonides, a knowledgeable, wise figure who gives advice about politics. Concerning historiography, there are several affinities concerning the method. For example, Xenophon says that he is going to talk about the truth. He says that he will adduce evidence. He uses the vocabulary of causes. He proposes an order of his narrative. He points to historical facts in this work, and which contains also historical flashbacks, and I have some passages here. He provides geographical information. And again here, I have selected one passage which seems to me to evoke Thucydides, because Xenophon encourages his readers to judge what he says, and in the same way that Thucydides encourages again his readers to judge his work. And again, like Thucydides, he talks about his findings. Apart from method, of course, there are some historiographical topics, such as Greeks and barbarians, the topic of the beginning of injustice, which evokes Herodotus, and manifold engagement with Thucydides' funeral oration. Here, Nicole Oro, Diller, and Farrell have presented some aspects of this engagement. I think there is more work to be done towards this direction. So some of these parallels concern the topics I have included here. So Athens as the center of the world and as an island, which is again mentioned in Pericles' speeches in Thucydides, the allusion to the Sicilian expedition. Again, the fourth chapter, Xenophon wonders why the polis does not imitate notable individuals, which again evokes Pericles' idea that Athens imitates no constitution. In 416, in a rhetorical question, Xenophon says, but why should we dwell on the past? Which again evokes Pericles and other speakers in Thucydides' history. The concern for the polyanthropia, the increase of the population, again, is a Thucydidean concern already from the archaeology. And of course, this rhetoric about the Athenians gaining the obedience of allies voluntarily, of course, this is an idea which circulated in classical times, but again, the wording and the word viasameni is present in Thucydides. The reference to earth and sea, peace on earth and sea in the poroi, and again, antithetically in Thucydides, where Berkeley says that we're going to invade earth and sea, and Athens as a cultural center for philosophers, sophists, and artists. So there is a complex engagement with this Athenian rhetoric, and there is also a debate. For example, John Dillery has argued that Xenophon employs this topo in order to advocate tranquility, but other scholars such as Farrell believe that Xenophon in the poroi does not really abandon hegemony, but gives proposals in order to transform it. So he makes some comparison also with the Hiero. And the same goes with the paper by Shorn. I was also struck by the emphasis on ease in this work. And I think this is also quite interesting in my opinion. For example, in these passages, Xenophon suggests that what he proposes is easy. And he even goes on to say that I don't think I will be admired for having found out something which is difficult to find. And again, he says that what I'm proposing can be implemented without toil and without risk and without expenses. The same rhetoric can be found in the Economicus, where it is said that agricultural art is easy to learn. And I think that these statements seem to run contrary to the Socratic valorization of ponos that we encounter throughout Xenophon's work. They also look like a subversion of the Thucydidean method, which also underlines difficulty and ponos in historical research. And Athenian politics seems to be aligned with or reduced to a simple practical skill. Perhaps it is a persuasive strategy if we take into account that the Athenians had an inclination to ease, animenos diatomeni. So, as a conclusion, which is really provisional, Pori is a mature experiment in applied political economy composed in a language which combines Socratic, oratorical, and Thucydidean features. The engagement with Thucydides is, in my opinion, more creative and intriguing. If we were to characterize it as a genre, I think it's a new genre. Of course, rhetoric is prevalent, but again, the Socratic background is very ubiquitous. So perhaps we could say that it's a pamphlet of a Socratic type, but not a real pamphlet with our modern standards. It's a dialogical, reflective, and provocative work which subverts, transforms, or even parodies Athenian topoi about imperialism. The work's novelty lies in its practical proposals, but also in its literary features. By refusing to be bound by genre, Xenophon creates an effect of surprise to his audience and attracts their attention. His Athens is to become, through benefaction and friendship, what the Athenians of Thucydides assumed it should achieve through power, a city indispensable to others. If we can learn to use our assets wisely, as Socrates taught at the scale of the oikos, we can also, Xenophon suggests, learn to use resources more profitably at the scale of the polis. So thank you very much. I think this is my bibliography, a selection about the articles I mentioned in my talk. Thanks.
Screenshot of your bibliography. Thank you so much, Melina. Another wonderful paper. Let me open up the floor to comments or questions. And it's wonderful to see this, this paper now. It's kind of
Michele Bandini says he's preparing an edition about yes, an edition of the ways and means. Yes.
Okay, good. Yes, good to know that. Okay. So Luke, I think your hand was up first.
Thanks, Melina. It's really interesting. I wonder about many things, but let me ask one question about a certain tension between, I think, your correct statement that genres are not that crystallized already, and on the other hand, your wish to identify very specific genres. So, for example, I noted down some of the things you want to ascribe to historiography, like calling for witnesses with martyrei, like this signposting with nun tauta lexo, aeretai. I mean, these seem to me very commonplace
rhetoric
again, exactly. And I mean, when I read it, I think it's closest to that, but I also wonder, so that's my first question, kind of how can you on the one hand say genres are fluid and on the other hand try to identify them? There's a certain tension, and related to that question is how much do you need it? Because I don't need the poroi to be a historiographical text for Xenophon to engage with the thought of Thucydides, right? That seems to me, again, something slightly different.
Yeah, I agree. I don't take it to be actually historiographical or rhetorical, but yeah, I think I want to identify a genre because everybody does. So, so in order to participate in this discussion, and actually, I was intrigued, the truth to tell, by Janssen's discussion, who devoted something like 30 pages to argue that it is a pamphlet. But interestingly, in order to reach this conclusion, he didn't use any of Xenophon's other works. He only relied on other fourth century writers and on Aristotle's definition of this category of works, poristai. So yes, in order to participate in this discussion, I think it's more realistic to say that we have really no genre. We have just a mixture. It's more realistic.
I think that must be right, and I mean, and I will shut up. But I last year gave a talk on let's say politeia literature and looking at the wide variety of that sort of literature in the classical and archaic period, and we don't really know what they look like. I mean, some of them may well have actually looked a bit like this, but you know.
It may be also part of the politeia literature because the way it starts, he talks about politeia and then the best leaders. So it may be the case. But yes, it's true that he shows this awareness of different pre-existing generic strategies, which of course are common. I mean, the vocabulary of reflection again is common in historiography, in rhetoric, in philosophy. So everything that I showed actually is common between these genres. Yeah.
So I'd also say, just to add to this, Xenophon does quite often seem to be kind of drawing particular genres to our attention in interesting ways. as you yourself have shown in one nice example, Luke. So yeah, I mean that seems to be a reasonable part of the discussion. But I should have.
Oh no, that I agree with, but yeah.
Okay. Bob.
Thank you, Melina, for your wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. So I was struck by your emphasis on of Xenophon's emphasis on the ease of all the measures he proposes. And I was wondering, do you maybe think that this has to do with the general post-war rhetoric, that Athens is a city that has conducted too much warfare and now has to focus again on measures um,
Yeah.
to be wealthy again in peacetime, and does Panos maybe also have to do with that, in the sense that Panos, which can be redefined as a emphasis on agriculture, as you see in the Economicus, but is often also associated with grand pursuits of big plans, such as Alcibiades' plan to invade Sicily.
Mm-hmm. Actually, truth to tell, I think that Xenophon uh, perhaps believes that his propositions may not be well received, or may sound complex. That is why there are so many hypophora schemes in his work, where he tries to answer objections. In order, I think the emphasis on ease is a continuation of that, because it's like trying to answer an objection. Oh, who is going to undertake all this? And it's a persuasive strategy, in my opinion. See, he wants to show that no, don't worry, it's easy, and there is no cost, no risk, etc. But yeah, several marks in his work shows that he has this concern. He has this concern about the implementation. I think he's pessimistic about the potential implementation of his propositions.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Mariana.
Hello, Melina. Thank you very much for your clear and informative talk. I learned a lot from it. So I am personally very interested in the biography of Xenophon, because he grows on you after a while, as you must know too. And I have been dealing with him very intensively for the last 2 or 3 years. So I've grown to like him, although I didn't like him at the beginning. Anyway, I wanted to ask you a very concrete question. Maybe you haven't thought about, maybe you have, I don't know. How do you put this work, the Poroi, in his, where do you place it in his biography, in his life? Because I'm very worried about some things that we think are facts about Xenophon, especially his chronology, which I think is far from clear, although nobody wants to deal with it, nor do I. But I think there are things that should be rechecked there. So very concrete question. Where do you put this work in his biography, and what does it mean in his biography?
Yeah, I agree with the scholarly consensus, actually, that it is written around the end of his life, and there are some internal markers, like when he talks about the Isphora during the Sacred War. So we are pretty sure that it was written around the end of his life. So the reason why he wrote that, I think again is quite obvious from the argumentation, because he has witnessed a disillusionment, because it was not only that Athens lost the empire and was defeated by the Spartans during the Peloponnesian War. Even the Second Athenian League was also a failure. So I think this work, yes, tries to offer some propositions in order to improve the political situation in Athens.
I think that's clear, yeah. But I wanted to ask you, does it mean, writing this work, that he has settled his score with Athens, that he has, gained the trust of the Athenians again, that he has made his peace with Athens? Or in other simpler words, did he come back to Athens? That is what I want you to say.
I haven't I haven't really studied,
Okay.
but okay, I'm not sure there is conclusive evidence about that. But in my opinion, his ideas are the same throughout his corpus. So I don't think that Xenophon, whether he settled in Athens or not, he changed his ideas. He continues to be aristocratic, even lover of Sparta, etc. I don't think he changed. And even the Poro, we can see these traces. His emphasis on benevolence, on stability, on friendship, all this Socratic background, which is evident also in his other works. And even concerning the metics, he says that it's not good to have them fight with the hoplites. Which again shows his emphasis on hierarchy, which we can see in his other works. So I don't think that he really changed his ideas. He changed the different genres that he cultivated, or the new genres that he proposed, but his ideas are the same.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, another wonderful paper. We've reached our 10 minutes to question time. So I think right now we'll thank our speakers again. Then if anyone would like to stay for a little longer to ask further questions, you're most welcome. But let's thank Bautista and Melina for two really wonderful and stimulating papers. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
I really enjoyed it.
Go. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, Emily.
Thank you so much, Bautista. This was wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed your paper.
And hope to see you eventually, like personally, Not
Let's think what's going to be the next Xenophon.
I don't know.
The triennial conference in next year, probably. So hopefully many of us will be able to come together for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, goodbye, Fiorenza. It was nice to see you.
Yes, Fiorenza, lovely to see you indeed. Well, I think we didn't have any more questions, so we'll
Hi, everyone.
Nice to see you. How are you doing?
Yes, I'm fine.
Very good. Very good.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Well, goodbye and thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for your talk.